Welcome to the If I Had More Time podcast. My name is Eric Geiger, senior pastor at Mariners Church, and I am joined by a good friend, like a great friend. We've been friends since I've been here, really, which is like over 7 years now. Will O'Neill. He's been in my life group for, like, we've watched our kids grow up together in the same life group for 7 years.
Yeah, we started Rooted together.
Yes, we did Rooted together.
That's right.
So right now, people who are doing the winter session of Rooted in 2026, we did the winter session of Rooted in 2019.
That's right.
Yeah. So we were winter session 2019 Rooted.
Yep.
Gosh, man.
All thanks to your wife, because Kay reached out to my wife and said, hey, we're going to do this. And Jenny came home and said, hey, I just got asked by the new pastor and his wife, can we do Rooted? I said, I don't know. I'm already in a life group. I'm not sure I need to do this. And she said, I don't think you heard me. And I said, oh, we're doing that.
Yeah. Had you not done Rooted before?
No, I hadn't.
So you were in a life group without doing Rooted?
I was in one of Eric Hurd's executive men's groups.
That's cool. Well, there is a tip by that, and a lot of people don't realize it. And I'll just give it to you, because some of you in our church, you keep hearing us talk about Rooted, and you're like, I want to do it, but I don't know if I'm going to like the people in my group. Now, oftentimes, I mean, the vast majority of people just get thrown into a group and they end up saying, how on earth did God know that these are the exact people that I needed to be in community with? So we hear that story all the time. But here's like a little tip. You can do what my wife did. You can pursue your own group, and then you just put it on a sheet of paper. These are the people that I want to be in my Rooted group. So Kay, basically, I don't even know how she met Jenny, but some kind of way was like, we're going to have them in our group.
It worked out.
Yeah, it worked out. So you were the mayor of Newport Beach in 2020.
That's right.
And that you and I, we always have had talks in our friendship, but we talked more. At least I remember talking more that year because you were so helpful to me. There were so many decisions that I was making, and obviously I was talking with our directional elders, but then there was probably a handful of people outside of our directional elders that I had on speed dial during that time, and you were one of those people. You led Newport Beach during the time of COVID. I know there was all kinds of decisions that you were part of making on restaurants being able to expand and outside, and it was a fascinating time to be a leader.
Yeah, it was. It was really hard. I mean, that year was particularly difficult for our entire community because most people at this point have sort of forgotten this was actually in the same year. But I mean, that actually started with a helicopter crash. And so, when we lost Kobe Bryant, which the world recognized losing Kobe, we in Newport, we lost a lot of moms and dads and daughters. It was a really, really awful moment.
And that's like 3 weeks into your mayorship.
Yeah, it was about a month.
Yeah.
And it was just, it hurt. It just hurt. Like, I know that you as pastor, you feel the ups and downs of your church community, but the downs you feel a lot more. I mean,
totally.
You just do. It's very similar to something my dad has always said, which is, you're a parent's high mark is their child's low mark, right? Like, so whatever, if you've got 5 kids, your happiness is going to be pegged to the least happy child at that moment.
Yeah, you're only as happy as the sadness of one of your kids.
Right. And so in this situation, when you get into positions of authority, I think you really try to take on as much as possible the ebbs and flows of your community. So that was a particularly awful moment. And then you go like right into COVID.
Yeah.
And then you start all of the things that you didn't really know what that meant. What are we going to do in response to, a global pandemic? Then you start dealing with a lot of the social unrest. So you move from that into a lot of the protests that came after George Floyd.
Yeah.
And so in Newport Beach, for example, I don't think we'd ever had a protest dealing with law enforcement, and we had 5 in one day.
Oh, wow.
And so that whole year was just one big moment. But, I learned a lot that year, certainly, and certainly a lot of conversations with people like you, with some really close friends of mine. I had people checking in on me and just making sure that I was actually doing Peloton that year, because they were saying, look, man, you're going to take on a lot of stress.
Yes.
You've got to find a healthy outlet.
I'm glad you did, And then you continue to serve city council, and then was a mayor again in 24.
That's right.
And then now you are the chairman of the Republican Party in Orange County.
I am.
And what people don't know on all of your political roles, that honestly I wouldn't know unless we had become friends. I mean, I know that people in politics don't make a ton of bank, but a lot of your roles are really volunteer roles.
That's right. Yeah. So on city council, I think we pegged it at about 70 cents an hour or so. Maybe, it might have been less.
Okay.
And then my current,
I'd say almost volunteer. Yeah.
my current role is unpaid. But a lot of that has been informed actually by the way we lived through 2020 and the way that I saw some people rise, some people fall. A lot of the decisions that were made and, the way that they thought about it. And so, this sermon series right now of On the Table obviously is touching on a lot of things that, are really near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. I had a son, for example, start kindergarten on Zoom. And, my wife was an elementary school teacher, and she was, we've been fortunate enough that she's at home with the kids, and she was having a terrible time with our son at home on Zoom on kindergarten. There are a lot of people that struggled that year. And we need to be taking all of that into account when we're thinking about, if something were to come next, how did we handle it? But I mean, even during that year, though, there were a lot of frameworks that I was working under and reaching out and talking to people that, much smarter than I am, a lot of wisdom to try to figure out what should I do.
Yeah. And then I want to get into some of the things that you and I've talked about, which really relates to this message. And you've passed on books to me that have helped me, and I've learned a lot from you, and I'm really grateful for the friendship and the relationship. But you didn't just go into political life by trade, a lawyer, and then just got interested in serving in the community.
I mean, sort of.
I'm trying to set you up for give me the bio of that.
I'll be super quick on it because I'm actually a fourth generation attorney, and so my grandmother was actually she went to law school in 1940 at Bolt. She was which is UC Berkeley, she was only one of like a handful of women in her class, and actually was in class and told by a professor, you shouldn't be here because you're taking the spot of a man who would be supporting his family.
Oh my gosh.
It's amazing where we've gotten to, but that's where we started. And so my grandmother fortunately was there because her last name was Murphy and my grandfather's name was O'Neill, and they met at law school, sitting near each other. And so, funny enough, my grandfather actually never finished law school. My grandmother did.
Wow.
And so my daughter's middle name, by the way, is Elizabeth, named after my grandmother, because I want her to remember the women that came before her.
I love that.
To give her the opportunities that she has.
Yeah.
And so I'm fourth generation attorney, really proud of everyone who's come before me. And, I've got two parents that are just incredible, spent a lot of time instilling service. So my dad was actually a federal district court judge. My mom, when I was growing up, ran what's called the YWCA, which in Fresno was called the Marjorie Mason Center. They took in battered women and children. So my sister and I would actually do homework at the Marjorie Mason Center, recognizing, how fortunate we were to have a stable home, while a lot of the people around us obviously did not.
Yeah.
So public service has always been something that my parents instilled. I didn't think it'd be, running for office, but in 20, I guess it was around 2014, a friend of mine came to me and said, hey, you should go run for local city council. And my response to him at the time was, no, that sounds terrible. Why would anyone do that? And ultimately, though, he had some people surround me, ask me to really think about it. I thought about it. I took about 6 months of just really talking. God opened some doors for me that had no business being opened. I really realized I enjoyed it. I ran for office in 2016, won that race. And then was mayor in 2020. No one ran against me, which I will just tell you real quickly is the best way to win.
Yeah.
But I won re-election in 20, and then I was termed off in 24 when I was mayor the second time. And the whole time, I was really fortunate the whole time to be in my executive men's group here at Mariners Church because all those guys they knew me before I started going into politics, and so while I was kind of running through and they kept me stable, they kept me down to the ground. I mean, they at no point did they ever kind of treat me any different just because all of a sudden, I was mayor of a city.
Yeah, that's cool. Mm-hmm. I love that. And your wife serves in the kids ministry.
She does.
Which I'm super thankful for. I see her in the Mariners Kids t-shirt.
She loves that.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
So, man, thank you. You guys have made an impact on our church. One of the things that I've always enjoyed about anytime we've had a conversation about something that is pressing, like, hey, here's something currently in the culture, you pull up to history.
Yeah.
And so you have you read a ton, a voracious reader. You have a high respect for, like, let's step back and see the overall picture. And then I know you have that in terms of even scripture. Let's step back and see what God's done in terms of the history that he's writing. So I thought I would throw out a couple things that you and I have talked about. outside the podcast that we just talked about in the past. So I want to go historical for a bit. The message this weekend was when to disobey the government.
Right.
And outside of the U.S., the phrase Lex Rex, 1654, a Scottish pastor and theologian, Samuel Rutherford, wrote a book called Lex Rex, which literally means law is king. At the time, kings across Europe ruled by the philosophy Rex Lex, which is the king is law, which was essentially what I say happens, kind of like the Roman Empire. I'm completely in charge. And he flipped it, the phrase, upside down to Lex Rex. No, the law is king. How does that relate to how the U.S. has been set up? How does that relate to your view of the Christian faith?
Yeah. So what's interesting is, C.S. Lewis actually has this phrase that he likes to call chronological snobbery.
Yes.
Right. So C.S. Lewis has this theory that people look back 200, 300, 500, 1,000 years and they read something and they say, we're much smarter. We have so much more wisdom than they do. How could they possibly know and advise us on what we should be doing today? And the truth is, probably, frankly, if you look around and jump on TikTok, I would just say you're not exactly seeing the height of our wisdom as a society. Yeah. But most of us actually, you doom scroll a lot right now. And so
if you're not careful, you can go down a rabbit hole.
You can. And so I actually try to ground myself, to your point, in history. And part of it, actually, I always thought, so Kenton Beshore, pastor here for a long, long time, gave a sermon that has always stuck with me. And what he said was, you are unique, your circumstances are not. Right. It's sort of similar. It's like a more Christian-based version of, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Yes.
So if you ground yourself in history and realize that a lot of history is either cyclical or builds on itself, then you can kind of see where we're going and ground yourself into those principles. And so, that quote is really interesting given the context of its time. So 4 years before that, Charles I was the King of England and actually went to war with Parliament at the time. And there was the English Civil War. Charles I, his military lost, and he was tried for treason and ultimately executed. And most people don't know that, but people at the beginning of our country did, the United States. And so in 1650, Charles I is executed. 100 years later, in 1750, in Boston, there was a minister named Jonathan Mayhew. And Jonathan Mayhew is one of those people that if you are really into American history, like really into it, you know who he is.
Okay.
Most people don't, which is really unfortunate because he was actually referenced by John Adams as, quote, his quote was the spark that ignited the American Revolution.
What was his role?
So he was a minister. So
really?
So he's a pastor at a local church in Boston. And the interesting thing about Boston, by the way, in 1750, people sort of forget the size and scope of American colonies at the time. So Boston in 1750 had around 16,000 people living in it.
Wow.
Right. So Fenway Park right now, about 37,000 people can sit there. So the entire city of Boston at the time in 1750 would have filled half of Fenway Park.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah. And so sometimes people think, how did all these founders know each other? How did all these founders kind of read the same things? It's because it wasn't that big. It was big enough. It was certainly big enough, but it wasn't big enough where you're kind of sitting there saying, holy cow, I can't believe someone's reading the same thing in Orange County as they are in Boston today. Now you kind of realize, okay, so you have a minister who was looking back 100 years and wanted to ask the question, was that trial of treason against Charles I and the ultimate execution, was that considered valid under Romans 13?
Whoa.
And the question, and that was a really important question.
That's wild.
You know what's even more wild? The reason that John Adams called him the spark that lit the American Revolution, it's because they were questioning the same thing at a time when the colonies in America were deciding, what should we do about this whole English problem?
Right.
Like 1750, we're still 25 years before a lot of the Revolution War starts, but it's a country largely dominated by Christian belief, a lot of discussion around churches. And the question a lot of people were asking was, okay, so we don't really like what's going on with this colony situation where we, taxation without representation and whatnot, but can we do anything about it?
Wow.
Does Romans 13 cause us a problem? And Jonathan Mayhew, a pastor at the time in Boston, decided he would ask that question and really try to answer it in a sermon, and I'll just give you the title of the sermon because you publish books. I don't think you would have published a book with this title, A Discourse on Unlimited Submission and Non-Resistance to the Higher Powers.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like a dissertation, not a popular level.
It's not great.
Yeah.
But he actually came to exactly the same conclusion that your sermon does. I mean, his conclusion in the discussion was a focus on, okay, so you have this requirement that you submit to authorities that are instituted by God, and he focused a lot on the phrase God's ministers or God's servants within that, and he was focused really on, okay, so why should you be afraid of these earthly rulers? Well, it's because if you're doing evil, then they are necessarily being put in to do good. And so the question that he was asking was, okay, so what does that what does that look like? What does that mean? And so there are a couple things he said in there. Number one was, common tyrants and public oppressors are not entitled to obedience from their subjects by virtue of anything here laid down by the inspired apostle, right? So okay, so if we have this...
I love that. Say again. So that they're not entitled to...
Obedience,
right? Because they're tyrants.
Right.
So a tyrant is not entitled to obedience.
Right.
Yep.
Not because they're tyrants, but because... they're not entitled to obedience by virtue of anything laid down. And the reason for it is because, and this is what he says, thus, upon a careful review of the apostle's reasoning in this passage, it appears that his arguments to enforce submission are of such a nature as to conclude only in favor of submission to such rulers as he himself describes, i.e., such as the rule for the good of society, which is the only end of their institution. So you were talking in discussion about the idea of what's government for? Right. So when he's talking about the only end of their institution is ruling for the good of society, that's another way of saying, to your point, restraining evil.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a whole bunch of people who have been talking about okay, what's government for? So restraining evil, I've always thought is a great one. Calvin said the government officials are to, quote, forcibly to repress the waywardness of evil men.
Yes.
That is a very old English way of saying restrain evil.
Yeah.
And then of course you have the Declaration, which I know we're going to come to because I like talking about it.
Yeah, I know that you and I spent time talking about
right
the beauty of the opening of it.
Yeah, but even going back way farther than this, by the way, Thomas Aquinas, his comment was, a tyrannical government is not just because it is directed not to the common good, but to the private good of the ruler. As the philosopher states, consequently, there is no sedition in disturbing a government of this kind. So this is all a question of, okay, so what's government for? What is God created government for? And then are there rulers that are going outside of that? So you can still submit to the authority without obeying it, to your point.
Yes.
And so the interesting thing...
Because submission is about my posture.
Right.
I'm realizing I'm not the ultimate. I'm not king either.
Right.
But I'm going to disobey when I'm asked to disobey God.
Exactly. And so you end up with this question of, okay, so first off, there's disobey, right? And then what do you do about it? So do you have an affirmative requirement to actually do something about it in the moment? And that's an interesting one that Mayhew also took on. So it's like that two-parter. Okay, so I'm looking at Romans 13, and the question that I have to ask myself first is what kind of government am I supposed to disobey?
Yeah.
And then what am I supposed to do about it once I start disobeying?
I think it was the same Samuel Rutherford. I think it was him who said that there's levels. One is you protest or you write, and then at some point you flee. Mm-hmm. People who are fleeing Iran right now, example. And then at some point, though, you fight.
That's right.
At some point, there's a fighting that happens.
Yeah, and so Mayhew's example, interestingly enough, is exactly yours.
Really?
So the parent-child relationship.
Really?
Yep. And so his analogy
makes me feel great.
I'm saying
we have the same Holy Spirit.
Yeah, you've got 275 years ago.
Wow.
And so but to that point, we're in the same moment, and you're giving a very similar sermon to Jonathan Mayhew in 1750. Why? Because the Bible doesn't change.
That's right. Come on. That's legit.
Exactly.
That's legit right there.
And so his comment on the parent, by the way, just to kind of it's slightly different, but it's very similar, is that the children are called to submit to the parent because a just and kind parent's supervision will contribute to the happiness of the whole family.
Yes.
But if the parent loses his senses and tries to harm or kill the children should surely and clearly not obey, but actively oppose.
Exactly.
Right?
It's so clear.
Yes.
That's so clear.
Right. And that's super important because that's 1750.
Yeah.
And so many people respond positively to the sermon that it's written down in pamphlet form and then starts making its way around the colonies. So the people who end up writing the Declaration of Independence, including absolutely John Adams, had read Jonathan Mayhew and incorporated his ideas into what would ultimately be the greatest sentence ever written in politics.
Okay. I love that you describe it that way. So the greatest sentence ever written in politics, why is it so great?
Yeah,
and who else has said that?
Yeah, so the greatest, I stole that.
Yes, I know. I've heard that before.
No, I totally stole that. I stole it because it's the name of a book that came out this year, or actually it might have been late last year, by Walter Isaacson. So Walter Isaacson has written a whole bunch of great biographies.
Like Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs,
yeah.
Yeah, and Benjamin Franklin and whatnot.
Okay.
And he just wrote a book, and I encourage folks to read it. It's super short, phenomenal, especially that this year we're celebrating our 250th celebration as a country, going back to the Declaration of Independence. People need to read this stuff. And Walter Isaacson's book, The Greatest Sentence Ever Written, just phenomenal. I encourage everyone to pick it up.
Okay, so why do you love the sentence so much?
Yeah, I love it. So I want to just reread it because it's one of those. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then just super quick, the sentence right after it, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So when we just break it down quickly, we hold these truths to be self-evident. So a self-evident truth is one that you don't have to debate. You don't have to sit back and try to justify. It is so obvious that it is self-evident. And so this really mattered because this is the Declaration of Independence comes on the heels of the Enlightenment movement, right? So the Enlightenment movement is, you can kind of debate when it starts, but let's just say 1600s, 1700s, in that range. And you had great thinkers that you learn about in high school and then forget about, right? So like Locke and Rousseau and Hobbes. Yeah. And so a lot of the discussion about the social contract theory, which we can talk about, but like the idea is, okay, how do we discover truths, right? How do we use our reason that God gave us to discover the truths about ourselves, about the universe, about a whole bunch of different things? And amazing things came out of the Enlightenment movement, including and especially the Declaration of Independence. But in this case, if you're having debate amongst people, but there's something that's so obvious that we don't even have to debate that, and we can use that as a grounded tool, that's called self-evident truths. And so when you start with the phrase that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, this is a culmination of a lot of discussion and a lot of common reading and thought processes. But it's acknowledging that these rights come from your Creator, which is where the term natural rights comes from. And so when you are hearing someone discussing natural rights, you are talking about rights that are given by a Creator. And this is a massive difference. So to your point about Lex Rex versus Rex Lex, you can go back to Louis XIV in France, who said, L'État, c'est moi, which is basically the state, it is me. Huge difference between a monarchy that believes that they are entirely the state imbued in one person versus, and believing that the rights come from them.
Right.
Versus the rights come from our Creator, and government exists solely to protect those rights is a massive sea change.
That is massive,
and it's a really big deal because so coming back around just real quickly to Romans 13. Romans 13 does not prescribe a very specific set of government that you have to have.
And I've always appreciated that about you. You hold obviously you're passionate about the roles that you've been in, but you have always stepped back and realized that there's been different seasons where politics has looked differently.
100%.
That it's not a prescription in the Scripture, but except for this statement that everyone's created in the image of God.
That's right. And there are a lot of people who will pause, by the way, when you start talking about the fact that people who own slaves said all men are created equal. And it's really important that we wrestle with that, and we have been for a really long time. And actually, I thought Walter Isaacson actually does a really nice job.
What's he say about that?
Well, he says, you got to go back to some of the sentences. So there's actually, interestingly enough, people don't know this. Not a lot of people know this. Thomas Jefferson had actually written into the Declaration of Independence a paragraph talking about the evils of slavery that was ultimately taken out because of politics, of all things. And so what his discussion focuses on, and there are some great discussions about this, is what does that even mean, though? Like, all men are created equal, and why did Jefferson believe that? And you could look back at a writing that Jefferson would write 30, 40 years later. I can't remember exactly when it was. But he explained that, quote, the mass of mankind has not been born with saddles on their backs, nor a favored few booted and spurred, ready to ride them legitimately by the grace of God. In other words, yeah, Eric, I'm going to probably be able to lift more weight than you are because genetically I just came out really big.
You were shot put at Stanford.
Yeah, I was.
You did
yeah.
So
I was,
I think,
which was great for shot put and terrible for airplanes. But like, so genetically.
But I've been working out, bro. I've been working out.
I know. But like that's not the principles here. Like we're not talking about all men are created equal athletically. Like I'm not jumping out on the NFL football field and suddenly playing on Sundays. But it does mean that it's a total reversal of what you saw in Great Britain and a lot of other, like India, for example, with the caste system, the hierarchy system that is hereditary in Britain. Like it was rejecting all of this discussion. And so as you look at the U.S. Constitution, which comes about 11 years later after the Declaration, you see that we're calling for a more perfect union. Not a perfect one.
A more perfect one.
But a more perfect one. And we've moved a long way from that moment. And
we do want to, we are obviously against slavery and the viewing any people as less than others.
Exactly. And so what Isaacson kind of bridged was, look, you got to look at what happened in 1776 as what, the moral arc of history that MLK would ultimately reference, quoting, by the way, a sermon right before the Civil War occurred, because the Civil War came about because of the words that were in the Declaration of Independence, because Abraham Lincoln looked at it, believed in it, went to war for it, and ultimately gave a speech at Gettysburg where he referenced 77 years ago. And this is Walter Isaacson speaking. It would take 77 years before Abraham Lincoln would recognize the bending of the moral arc of America as he gave the Gettysburg Address in the midst of a civil war that would claim around 620,000 lives. That original sin of the United States has caused an incredible amount of pain and death, but it was something that was recognized in the Declaration of Independence that is moving us forward even through today. And so when you're talking about the greatest sentence ever written in politics, did they live up to it at that moment? No. But they started it, and we are continuing to move forward in that. And that's something that certainly in the Christian faith, the belief that individual dignity matters a great deal, and that everyone, imago Dei, the belief that everyone has the image of God imbued on them. We have to be looking at that, and especially when we're talking about how authorities treat us. Yeah,
no, man, that's great. There's debates at times about the founding of the country. I would say you definitely see Christian principles in the Declaration of Independence. I mean, that first beginning, we hold these truths to be self-evident. So that it's not like we have to define them. There's been self-revelation given. Even that's a statement about how God's revealing truth. It's obvious, and that all men are created equal. So some say that we're a secular nation. Others say we're a Christian nation. And then some say that we're founded on Christian principles. There's kind of like at least three groups. I'd say we're a Christian nation or founded on Christian principles. There's a lot of overlap in that Venn diagram. It's not a full circle, but there's some overlap in those two groups. But it's hard to say that we're just a secular nation when you look at the founding document. I saw an interview recently where it was on the news, and this woman was using the term Christian nationalism, which is like this junk drawer term where when anyone says the term, I want to say, wait, hold on, what do you mean by that? And how she defined it was, there's a group of people that think that everyone has rights because of God. Well, that's what the Declaration of Independence says, right? And so founded on Christian principles is where you would land based on the Declaration of Independence?
I think that's right. And in particular, I think that the term Christian nationalism, so the Christian nationalism, the way it's used now, I actually don't have any idea what people mean by it anymore.
Right, because it's used by all different groups.
That's right. And some people have used it pejoratively. Some people have used it in like a glowing way. And so this is one where people are trying to grab it and mold it and change it and fit to their own needs. Yes. And so I think instead of trying to use terms that are being thrown around right now. Why don't you just go back to actually like what the documents say?
Yeah. Or explain what you mean by something.
Yeah, that would help too.
Instead of just throwing out a term.
Right. But even then, like this continues to be the reason I keep going back, even before our country was founded, to even talk about the way that I was looking at things as mayor in 2020.
Yeah.
Right? So, you gave great advice in the sermon this week, and I loved it. And, I had been thinking about it myself, like how would I kind of describe this to people? Like, what are things that I would say to people? Like, okay, I took a lot of discussion in 2020. I was trying to work through things. And one of the things that I paid a lot of attention to was, okay, if I'm talking Romans 13 and I'm giving advice to either people in authority or people under authority, like what would it be? And it would be prepared, be thoughtful and nuanced, and then be decisive.
Yeah.
And so, be prepared. Read your Bible.
Yes.
Right? All of this stuff came before our country. All this stuff. Ooh, that's not a good thing. The Bible came before our country. The principles and discussions people have been having for 2,500 years since the New Testament has been written, these are things people have been discussing in deep detail. So read your Bible. And then if there are things that are bothering you about it or trying to reconcile things, like maybe, and just maybe, read commentaries, go talk to people, spend time in life groups, surround yourself with people who are way smarter than you. Like there are a lot of times when you and I have been talking where I ask you a question because I'm wrestling with something in the current environment, but I'm like, all right, what does the Bible say about this?
Yes.
Like, point me in the right direction. Let's go talk about it. Because this stuff that we're dealing with today, in large part, has been dealt with before.
Right.
It's just a different circumstance and a different time, but a lot of this has been dealing with because there have always been wars and famines.
Yes.
There's always been death and pestilence, and there's always been moments where people have stepped up and done unbelievable good.
Yeah.
And the question is like, if you're prepared to do that unbelievable good, like that's amazing. And then, be thoughtful and nuanced. Humility goes a really long way. I remember this story that drove me, and during 2024, I came up with I like themes. It just helps me guide what I want to do. So in 2020, no one remembers the theme because I listed it in December of 2019, and then everything happened, and no one remembers it.
Was it Remember the Helpers?
That was actually the theme in 2024.
Okay.
And you remember who said it?
Ronald Reagan?
Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Rogers?
So I actually came up with this theme.
I do remember that now.
Yeah. And so in 2024, the theme that I came up with for my year as mayor in Newport Beach was Remember the Helpers. And the reason for that is because I'd read a biography of Mr. Rogers. You remember he was a pastor before he became a famous.
I didn't remember that.
Yeah. So he was a minister.
Wow.
And so I got a kick out of the fact that I was, taking someone who everyone remembers as kind of a guy with kids puppets, but taking his view really seriously.
Yeah.
And there's this story actually about Mr. Rogers that every time he walked into the studio, every day he walked in the studio, he said a silent prayer, which was, "Dear Lord, let some word of this be yours."
Oh, that's cool.
Every day.
Yeah.
So he'd walk in, he'd record Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, and his prayer would be, "Let some of the word be yours." And so, be really thoughtful, like think really hard before taking action. But at some point, you're going to have to take action, and you got to make that decision.
Right.
And you got to move forward. And you did that in 20.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk a bit about when we obey and disobey. And in our current context in the U.S., what are the means of disobeying? So, I mean, my heart's been broken from some people in our church recently reaching out who are from Iran or have family in Iran, and the means of disobeying there is different than the means of disobeying here. So the means of disobeying here, and then, I mean, I do want to highlight what makes our form of government. It's not perfect. We're not saying that things are perfect here in the U.S., but our form of government even allows for some disobedience.
Not just allows for, is in the Constitution and protected as privileged. One of the reasons why, when you look back in the 1960s, for example, the enduring image of sheriff's deputies and police deputies turning hoses on people who were trying to just march against civil rights abuses, racial abuses.
Yep.
One of the reasons it hurts our soul so much is not just because of the racial injustice, which should hurt you more than what I'm about to say, but the second reason is because people were doing it peacefully. Like they were doing it in the way that we should as a society and as a country expect people to do it. And we still had the authorities at that time taking hoses to people and beating them.
Even though they were doing it peacefully.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons why, culturally it hurt so much. Religiously it hurt so much because we were watching, people imprinted with the dignity of God being destroyed by authorities that should have been protecting them.
Right.
And it's one of the reasons why when you really think of MLK's letter from Birmingham jail, which you remember who that was written to?
The church.
That's right. All of the white churches in the area, like, why aren't you stepping up for us? Why aren't you standing up for us and talking to people and trying to figure out, what is it about this moment that you are not seeing? And let me tell you what's happening. I mean, there's a reason why MLK is, we celebrate him as a nation now. There's a reason why when I go back to Washington, D.C., there's not one time I go back to D.C., even when it's really cold or raining, that I don't spend time. Now, I always go to Lincoln's Memorial, and I always stand there and look to the left and read the Gettysburg Address and look to the right and read his second inaugural address. I always do that because it grounds me and reminds me why it's worth fighting so hard for this country. But right down the way, I mean, it is like, it's a stone's throw away, is the MLK Memorial. And they have done a phenomenal job with that one, where they have quotes throughout his time on this earth. And they go from left to right, and it's just a beautiful moment to just sit there and remember how hard he fought, and also that he was a pastor. Right. And so all of the moral arc that he talked about was actually being grounded in the Bible that he read on a daily basis and tried to remind people this isn't what it's supposed to be like. Right. And so when we are trying to ground ourselves in the Bible and move forward as a society, I think we're doing, much better. So coming back around, you asked me about, what is it about our society that allows for, the pushback?
Yeah, and what does it look like?
That's right. And a big part of it is giving people voice. And so I'm a big fan of a principle called subsidiarity, which is actually a principle founded in the Catholic Church way before the United States came about. And the idea is basically take all things and try to push them down to the lowest level possible. And so in the Catholic Church, of course, it's very hierarchical. You have the Pope all the way down to your parish priest. And you want to do as much work at the parish priest level as you possibly can, because that's the person that can talk to the congregation, the flock, the people around them, and try to bring them in and do great things inside their communities. Same thing is true for government. So if you are at the federal level, there are things you need to be doing: military, foreign discussions, a whole bunch of other things. And then, but I want as much done at the local level as possible. So for example, like I want, as mayor of a city, I was a mayor of a city, to focus in on our road conditions, our police department, our fire department, and things like that. I don't want the federal government telling me what to do with those, but I also don't want to raise a militia anymore. I don't want to I don't want to go negotiate with France. But the principle of subsidiarity is something that we've always kind of adopted in this country, and and God has too, by the way, because like I said at the early in this podcast, there's no form of government referenced in Romans 13, but throughout the Bible, God talks a whole lot about cities.
Yes, he does.
Right? And you've spent a lot of time in sermons talking about that.
Yes. I mean, I am so fascinated that the book of Jonah ends with God talking about the city of Nineveh, which was an evil city, and asking Jonah, hey, you cared about this plant. Why should I not care? It ends with a question. Why should I not care about Nineveh? It's got 120,000 people who don't know their right hand from their left hand.
Which is wild, by the way, because 120,000 people is about the same size as Costa Mesa.
Right.
And I love that Nineveh had a king and an army. I don't see that over in Costa Mesa.
Right. Yeah, but it just shows how, like in our current context, like Southern California, how significant our cities are.
That's right.
Orange County's got 34 cities, and a lot of them are Costa Mesa.
Yeah, in terms of size.
Yes.
Yeah. That's right.
Like, Huntington Beach is more than 200,000. Irvine is almost 300,000. Anaheim, Santa Ana are the two largest in Orange County. Yeah. I mean, these are massive cities when you look at the whole overview of history.
100%. No, it's massive.
Yeah.
And so Jeremiah 29:7. Also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. And then you look at what's coming. And when you're talking about what's coming, what does God use? He uses a city analogy. So Hebrews 13:14, for here we do not have an enduring city, but we are looking for the city that is to come.
Yes.
And so when we're talking about, okay, so what are you supposed to do? First, you're supposed to pray for your leaders. You're supposed to pray for those in authority.
And not just those you voted for.
That's right. exactly right.
Yeah.
I pray for people that I didn't vote for.
Yeah.
I pray for people who know my name and probably curse it sometimes because we butted heads so hard on public policy grounds. Now, not on personal grounds, but on public policy grounds, because I just think there are some public policies that don't respect the dignity of people the same way that I want to see, and I'm willing to go to butt heads over that. But at the end of the day, I'll pray for them anyway.
Yeah.
And that's because that's what we're called to do. And also get involved. Right. So like, you don't have to run for office to be involved. The First Amendment, you mentioned, First Amendment protects, coming together in assembly, but it also it protects your right to petition your government. Mm-hmm. And so you need to try to do that.
Yeah.
And you need to spend time talking to people, which all the more reason why, by the way, like I've done a lot in politics and I know a lot of people in Washington, D.C. President Trump is not picking up a call if I call him. Right.
Yeah.
That's all the more reason why the principle of subsidiarity matters, because if I call my mayor, there's a really good chance my mayor is going to pick up. And it's not because I'm a former mayor. It's because I'm in a city, and that's what mayors do, because they're always in the community. Do you know how many times, and maybe it's because I'm tall and, somewhat recognizable.
And dashing good looking.
Oh yeah. That's the prerequisite. Anyway, for all of you listening on the podcast, I'm very good looking. So anyway, it's because like I'd go to the grocery store or I'd be at, Sean or Aubrey's soccer games or something like that, and someone would walk over and want to talk to me about a tree in front of their house. Cool. I signed up for that.
That's great, man.
Yeah. And so
I love your servant heart in that. That's great.
But that's the point, right? So you have all of these opportunities in a republic that we have. You have the opportunity to talk to your city council, state representatives, federal representatives. You have all these opportunities to try to affect change. And I see some people doing some unbelievably great things in our communities that have absolutely nothing to do with trying to run for office. But then again, I see some really amazing people running for office, and I love to get out and support them, because if I can help them get elected and then they get to go do some great things for communities, man, there's nothing better than that in politics.
That's great. That's awesome. All right. Well, I want to move into the last time of our podcast. This could be a bit. This is, I think, the more challenging wrestle on when to disobey. So I think what's clear is if you're Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and you're told to bow down and worship a statue. If I'm going to obey God, I have to disobey that command because God's told me to only worship Him. There are times when you're asked to do something that's like a level of conscience. So when it comes to the Scripture or a command in Scripture, to me, it's really clear. If the command says do this, you obey the command, and even if it means disobey people. If the command forbids this, you obey the command, even if that means disobeying people, right? Even if it means disobeying your authorities, whether that's at work or in the government. Conscience is where it's more difficult and challenging for me. I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot on this one. It was one conversation that we were having, and you made a distinction between I thought the overreach of the government during COVID, saying that we couldn't gather, and you made a distinction between that and the mask mandates.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm oftentimes people would put those together, that masks were oppressive or we shouldn't have been, there's people who'd say there was data for them. There's people who say there wasn't data for them. But when it comes to our Declaration of Independence, again, that is in Romans 13, in our context, that's the governing authority, which is beautiful about our context, that we don't have an emperor or a king, that the Rex Lex, the law is king. And our Constitution allows for that we can gather, but the Constitution doesn't protect the mask, right? Am I remembering our conversation correctly?
Yeah, so let's take a slightly different approach.
Okay.
So let's take beach closures versus church closures.
Okay.
Fair enough?
Yes.
Okay. So in the context of 2020, we had really weird rules. And
they were constantly changing.
They were constantly changing. And one of the things that I spent a lot of time doing was reading it. And fortunately, I'm an attorney, so it actually helped me. But the vast majority of people not only are not attorneys, but not used to reading government speak. And so they didn't know what to do. The number one group of people that would call me asking me what they should do are actually hairdressers and salon owners, because these are people whose entire livelihood is being 1 foot away from someone at all
Right.
times. They didn't know what to do, and they were being shut down. So I spent a lot of time talking to people about how to interpret, color coded systems and what this meant and what that meant. And so let's take beach closures for a second. So kind of famously at this point, I very much disagreed with our governor. So Los Angeles, put yourself back in the beginning of 2020. Los Angeles County shut down all their beaches. San Diego County shut down all of their beaches. Newport Beach and a lot of the Orange County beaches stayed open. And the question I got asked from time to time was, why? And the answer I gave was, I spent a lot of time on the front end of this. Okay, so like the conversation about nuance and humility.
Yeah.
The question I asked myself was, what's my role in all of this? And I'm on a city council. I'm not a healthcare agency. I am not. I'm looking at it saying, well, look, I'm really concerned. So we're not going to pass laws ourselves. So the question we now have is, if we're not going to pass laws, because first off, I'm not a doctor, but even if I were, that's not my role on a city council, then we need to be sitting back and saying, what's our role? And our role was to educate people as much as possible. Well, who knows? Who do people trust with their health?
You partnered with Hogue a lot during that time.
Exactly, doctors. Yeah, and Hogue. So coming back for just a second.
I remember that.
Yeah, and so I talked to Hogue a lot. And so amazingly enough, people forget this, but actually the first case of COVID was actually treated at Hogue Hospital in Newport Beach. Why? Because they have an expert over there who just happened to have a daughter who babysat my kids. And so I knew him. And so I called him and we talked. And so I had a really good feel for what COVID was going to be, because we had experts that I reached out to and talked to. And I knew this was going to be a respiratory virus that affected people, especially older people, pretty dramatically. So we needed to push information out so people could make decisions for themselves on what their own risk profiles were. But I knew for certain, and I mean for certain in my mind, that people were safer outdoors than they were indoors. And I needed the biggest possible place we had in our city to have people outdoors was the beach. So I believe very strongly, and I still do, and I think
that the beach was a way to serve the people.
That's right. And keeping it open was a way to keep people healthy.
Yes.
And so when the governor shut it down, I went out very publicly and very aggressively pushed back on him, because I thought I had to go protect the people that I served.
Right.
I didn't do that because there's a commandment in the Bible that tells me that the beaches shall stay open.
So that would be an example of a conscience.
That's right.
Decision.
So the example I'm giving is, like, you have a position of authority and your role is to protect the people you serve. You have to go out and fight for it no matter what.
Right.
So that's an example of conscience. An example, though, of a dictate that is very clear was churches. And one thing,
the dictate of you can't gather, or they have to be less than 100, or have
but even more so. Do you remember how churches were actually categorized? Non-essential.
Oh, totally. I mean,
and this is really important, because this is actually a conversation that needs to be had. Is like, when you're having this discussion and treating churches different, if you are saying that a liquor store and a marijuana dispensary are essential, but church isn't,
right,
I'm going to disobey you.
Yes.
I'm just going to. And there's no scenario where I'm not. And so this was something that even before the United States Supreme Court. So real quick, you asked again, like, how do we push back? How do we engage? Well, one of them is actually through our court system, right? So we have a constitutional republic where Article 3 is set up to have the court system. The U.S. Supreme Court ultimately decides how to read and interpret the Constitution. And in this case, the Supreme Court was asked about two cases. One was New York doing exactly what California was doing. So they had a case out of New York, or they had a case dealing with New York, and they had a case with California. Both, actually, funny enough, were actually using color-coded tier systems. They were different colors, but they were using color-coded tier systems. Both of them were deeming some businesses essential: hardware stores, acupuncturists, liquor stores, marijuana dispensaries, while churches and synagogues and other houses of worship were deemed non-essential.
Right.
So that was already going to be a huge problem. And then I know during your sermon you mentioned the discussion about singing. Well, when the U.S. Supreme Court mentioned that, they actually reminded everyone that Hollywood was receiving exemptions, but churches weren't. And so again, like, you were treating things differently than churches. So the whole point there, and the quote actually, and I'll just say this because I actually kind of like this quote: if Hollywood may host a studio audience or film a singing competition, while not a single soul may enter California's churches, synagogues, and mosques, something has gone seriously awry.
Who's the quote from?
The U.S. Supreme Court decision on that.
That's the decision.
That is a published decision that you can cite and quote all you want in future cases going forward.
So there's an example of our government, in the end, the arc of it, working for the good of the people.
I certainly agree with that statement. And so this is why, but this comes back to like, you can't anticipate certain things. You can't anticipate a global pandemic, and you can't anticipate how government's going to react. But what you can do is be prepared. And you can think really hard, and you can try to do things in a nuanced, thoughtful way with humility. And if you're a leader in authority listening to this, I really encourage you, be thinking really hard about this, because at the end of the day, every law ultimately is enforced at the end of a gun. And so is that law you're passing something that you actually think needs to be enforced that way? If it's not, then maybe the law isn't the right way to go about it.
Wow, that's good. Well, I'll give one a conscious example on my side that's less clear. And one of the things that you and I have in common is that I tend to, when I want to make a decision, I look back at historical. So we were clear on, hey, let's gather. So we started having gatherings in July. They were outside, multiple places, and then we opened up. We stayed outside for a long time. And so there were some that were disappointed that we weren't inside, but gosh, that was actually turned out not to be that rainy of a season. and
that's true.
And it was beautiful. It's like we can. Like, so we're obeying God by gathering, but because we can meet outside, we can. Let's, so that was our posture. Vaccines, less clear. So I was getting, the people were, for the general population of our church, were like really excited that we started having gatherings, but we didn't make a statement on vaccines. And so some, I think, wanted us to, and I think some even would have liked if we had been like a vaccine site. Others wanted us to speak against the vaccine. And so I looked back in history at 3 different approaches during the smallpox. And there was some that said, hey, they didn't call it a vaccine, they called it an inoculation. Get the inoculation, don't get the inoculation. And then a third view was, hey, it's your conscience. It's up to it. You listen to your conscience. So Jonathan Edwards, who I mean, I've quoted Edwards before. He has some amazing writings about his faith. He actually pushed the inoculation. Many people don't realize this, but he actually died from the inoculation to smallpox. Cotton Mather was a pastor who spoke against it, like it was by taking the inoculation, you weren't trusting God. And then John Newton, he's the one who famously wrote Amazing Grace. He pastored in such a way where everyone should listen to their conscience. That's how I chose to handle the vaccination. It was Amazing Grace style. I just thought I appreciate these other pastors from, centuries ago. I appreciate them, but I liked Newton's approach. So to me, that was an example. There's not a command in the scripture to take an inoculation or not take an inoculation, but sometimes you have to make decisions that are conscience based.
That's right. And full disclosure, I'm very public on where I stood during this time frame. Like, I was very opposed to mandates in general, and almost across the board, frankly. And so if folks want to really dive in a little bit on what some of the past positions and discussions were, that you are welcome to do so. I will tell you one of the ones that when you're dealing in public policy, you're dealing with all of these competing priorities. And one of the really hard challenges during 2020 and then 21, and then even frankly today, is you have some people who just want to myopically focus on one thing so that they can beat the tar out of someone over it.
Yeah.
And that's not okay. I mean, it's really not okay when you're in authority. And so I remember during that time frame, for example, when you're talking about a vaccine mandate, there was a discussion at the time about whether there should be a statewide mandate for public response, like first responders, police officers and firefighters and lifeguards, to have a mandate that they all get vaccinated. I was very aware, because we were watching some things happening in other cities, that we would have an exodus of people leaving our city if that happened.
If the mandate happened.
That's right. Because and leaving our city, meaning like police officers would have quit, firefighters would have quit, and they would have moved to other states.
Which, those people are critical.
And I wasn't going to be willing to lose those people.
Yeah, they're amazing.
That's right. But my core belief on public safety in particular, especially at the local level, is like, you exist for public safety. Like there's a few different things at every level of government that you exist for. Like local government exists in large part for public safety, good water and clean sewers and good infrastructure. Like those are your core three things. And when you think of a failing city, it's always one of those things.
Yeah.
Just to be clear. There are a lot of things I didn't list, like parks and libraries that I love, but like those aren't the things that if they fail, you're a failing city. Those first three things are things that if you fail, you're a failing city. And every time you think of a failing city, you think of one of those things.
Yeah.
I wasn't willing to lose our public safety officials to a vaccine mandate.
Yeah.
And no one knows this. I don't think I've ever said this publicly. I was prepared with an emergency ordinance and a resolution to direct our HR department not to comply with that mandate if the state had passed it, because it meant that much to me.
Yeah.
Now, is there something in the Bible telling me to do that? No.
Yeah. There's an example of conscience
Right.
again. Yeah.
Right. But like that's the thing is and this comes back into like the discussion about disobeying the government when there's not an explicit provision. If there's not an explicit provision,
This is when it gets challenging.
spend time talking to people.
Yes. And pray and fast and listen to the Spirit of God and seek wisdom.
You don't have to act rashly, usually.
Yes.
Not always. Sometimes you have to respond in the moment. But usually,
Yeah.
you have an opportunity to really spend time and think about stuff. And actually, a funny story, like I did spend a lot of time talking to people about the beach issue, a lot, because I wanted to make sure I was on solid ground, and I believed I was. You know who reached out to me? And he told this story publicly, so I can finally start talking about it. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He's got one of his very close friends, a very close friend of mine. He actually reached out and offered all of the data that he had
To help you
help me with the decision that I was making in Newport Beach.
That's great.
He didn't have to do that,
That's great.
but I was willing to take that call, and I was willing to take the information because I wanted to make the best decision I could. I surround myself as much as I possibly can with people
Yeah.
who can pour into me and tell me like when I'm doing something good, when I'm not doing something right.
It's great.
And I need people in my life who can who can kind of call me out
Yeah.
on things, and we all need that.
We do.
Get into life group.
That's right. No, that's good. Well, I'll wrap us up with that. So if there's a command that an authority in your life gives you that violates the Scripture, you disobey your leaders.
That's right.
You follow the Scripture. The Scripture's your ultimate authority, not the place that you work, not a governing leader. Hey, listen, not the rabbit hole you're down on social media, not a political party. There's nothing that's your authority if you're a Christian other than the Scripture. So you have that clear. When it's unclear, you listen to your conscience, and as Will encourage you, have community around you, seek wisdom, pray, fast, read the Scripture, and then that's when you follow your conscience.
That's right. And as we've talked about before, one of the huge things I learned in 2020 as mayor is that I didn't go to church to engage in politics. I engaged in politics so that I could go to church.
Yeah, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the Christians that we have in politics with that perspective, that I engage in politics so that I can protect the rights of people who want to gather for worship. So thanks for doing that, man.
No, thanks, Eric.
I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for listening to If I Had More Time podcast.